The void between stars was not silent on the bridge of the stalwart observer. It hummed with the low, pervasive thrum of the gravity drive, a sound so fundamental to existence that it was felt more than heard, the vibrational bedrock of life aboard the vessel. Senior xenologist Kalen stood at the main viewport, his long, multi-jointed fingers steepled behind his back, his obsidian eyes reflecting the pinprick tapestry of alien constellations. They were deep in the territory of the Cathar, a species so newly contacted that the ink on the preliminary accords was still figuratively wet. The Cathar were a proud, militaristic people, their culture built upon a foundation of perceived strength and intricate, unyielding honor codes. This mission, a joint survey of a resource-rich nebula, was a test, a delicate dance of diplomacy conducted against a backdrop of cosmic wonder and mutual suspicion. Kalen's role was to understand them, to find the common ground upon which a lasting peace, or at least a stable truce, could be built. He was good at his job, a patient and meticulous student of alien motivations. The Cathar liaison, a formidable individual whose chitinous plates clicked softly with every movement, approached. His name was a series of hard consonants and guttural stops that the universal transliterator rendered as Vorkan. Xenologist Kalen, our long-range sensors have detected an anomaly, a spatial distortion consistent with a high-velocity gravitational wake. It is not one of ours. Vorkan's voice, translated through the small device on his carapace, was flat and devoid of the emotional subharmonics Kalen had learned to identify. This was a statement of pure, unadulterated fact, and that made it more alarming than any display of alarm could have been. "Pirates?" Kalen asked, turning from the viewport. The human crew on the bridge, a mix of seasoned officers and specialists, maintained their professional composure, but he could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tightening of shoulders, a slight increase in the pace of keystrokes. Unlikely, the energy signature is immense, far beyond any known raider vessel. The wake is on an intercept course, projected contact in 17 minutes. Vorkan gestured with a claw-tipped limb towards the main tactical display. A crimson icon pulsed, a stark, malevolent heartbeat against the star chart. It was moving with a speed that defied conventional physics, a straight-line trajectory that spoke of a terrifying confidence. The ship's commander, a stern-faced woman named Captain Isolde, issued a series of quiet orders. The stalwart observer shifted from its survey posture to a state of guarded readiness. Shields were raised to standby, and weapon banks, though still dormant, were powered up. A message was dispatched to the nearest human outpost, a warning and a record cast into the light years. They watched the anomaly approach. It resolved from a sensor ghost into a tangible, terrifying reality. The vessel that emerged from the distortion was like nothing in the human or Cathar databases. It was colossal, a jagged, asymmetrical mass of dark, non-reflective metal that seemed to swallow the starlight around it. It possessed a brutal, insectoid aesthetic, all sharp angles and protruding spines, with no visible bridge, engines, or viewports. It was a weapon, pure and simple, a piece of engineering that spoke only of destruction. It did not hail them. It did not identify itself. It simply arrived, and then it began to attack. Beams of actinic green energy, corrosive and potent, lanced out from its hull, striking the stalwart observer's forward shields with a concussive blast that shuddered through the entire frame of the ship. Alarms blared, red light painting the faces of the crew in stark, panicked relief. The Cathar ship, the Glorious Talon, reacted with predictable ferocity. It moved to engage, its own powerful plasma cannons firing in disciplined, coordinated volleys. The green beams of the unknown assailant met the incandescent blue of the Cathar plasma. For a few moments, it seemed the Glorious Talon's martial prowess might hold the line. Then the alien ship unleashed its primary weapon. A wave of null energy, a propagating sphere of absolute blackness, erupted from its core. It washed over the Cathar vessel. There was no explosion, no fiery debris. The glorious talons simply unraveled. Its atomic structure disassociated, its mass converting into a brief, silent flash of light, and then nothing. One moment it was a mighty warship, the pride of the Cathar fleet. The next, it was a dissipating cloud of subatomic particles. The silence on the bridge of the stalwart observer was heavier than any sound, broken only by the frantic beeping of the damage control console and Vorken's sharp, involuntary intake of breath. Captain Isolde's voice was a razor of controlled panic. Evasive pattern Zeta, all power to rear shields, get us out of here. The stalwart observer was a science vessel, not a warship. Its only hope was flight. The gravity drive whined, straining as the ship veered away from the nebula, heading for open space. The alien vessel turned with an impossible agility, its sheer size belying its speed. Another null wave erupted, but the observer's desperate maneuver meant it only caught the edge of the effect. The ship screamed in protest. Entire sections of the outer hull were erased from existence, atmosphere venting into the void in a frozen, crystalline mist. Power failed across multiple decks. The main lights died, replaced by the dim, blood-red glow of emergency strips. Kalen was thrown to the deck, his head striking a console with a sickening crack. Dazed, he pushed himself up, his vision swimming. He saw Vorken, clinging to a support strut, his obsidian eyes fixed on the viewport where his people's ship had been. There was no rage in his posture, no cry for vengeance. There was only a profound, chilling stillness. The Cathar concept of honor had just been rendered meaningless by an enemy that offered no challenge, no glory, only absolute, impersonal annihilation. The alien ship closed in for the kill, its weapon ports glowing with a renewed malevolent energy. This was it. The end of the stalwart observer, the end of the mission, the end of their lives, a footnote in a conflict they did not understand. Kalen's mind, trained to analyze, to find patterns, could find none here. This was not war. This was pest control. Then a new gravitational wake registered on the mangled sensors. It was subtler than the first, a precise, controlled tear in the fabric of spacetime. A ship dropped out of its superluminal trajectory, positioning itself directly between the dying stalwart observer and its executioner. It was a human vessel, but unlike any Kalen had ever seen. It was smaller than the alien behemoth, but built with a brutal, functional elegance. Its hull was a patchwork of thick, interlocking armor plates, scarred and pitted from countless engagements. It had no graceful lines, no aesthetic pretensions. It was a block of fortified steel and tungsten, with massive, gimbaled thrusters and weapon emplacements that looked like they were designed for sheer kinetic impact. Painted in faded, chipped letters on its prow was a name, Indomitable Will. The alien ship hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if reassessing the new variable. It fired a probing salvo of its green energy beams. The Indomitable Will didn't raise a shield. It took the hits on its armor. Plates glowed white-hot, slagging and vaporizing, but the ship held its position. It did not broadcast a challenge. It did not demand surrender. A single, tight-beam, unencrypted transmission shot from the Indomitable Will to the stalwart observer, a voice, gravelly and utterly calm, cutting through the static. "Civilians, stand by for emergency tow. We will handle the threat." And then, the Indomitable Will moved. It was not the elegant dance of a Cathar duelist or the cautious retreat of a science vessel. It was a brawler's charge, a full-burn, head-on ramming speed assault directly into the heart of the enemy formation. Its own weapons fired, not beams of energy, but hypervelocity slugs of depleted uranium, each impact cratering the alien's dark hull with raw, concussive force. It was a display of violence so direct, so unsubtle, that it seemed to momentarily stun the far more technologically advanced foe. The battle, which had been a one-sided slaughter, was suddenly and violently joined. The bridge of the Starlight Observer was a scene of controlled chaos, a stark contrast to the silent, brutal ballet of death unfolding outside the fractured viewport. Captain Isolde was shouting orders, her voice hoarse, directing damage control teams to seal breaches and reroute power from non-essential systems. The air was thick with the acrid smell of ozone and burned insulation. Kalen, a gash on his temple sealed with a patch of synth flesh, had returned to his station, his xenologist's mind struggling to process the raw data of the conflict. He watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the indomitable will fought. It was a methodology of warfare so alien to his understanding that it defied all conventional tactical logic. The unknown aggressor, which the indomitable will's brief transmission had identified as a harvester, was clearly the superior force in terms of technology. Its null weapon had disintegrated the Cathar vessel with contemptuous ease, and its energy beams sliced through conventional shielding like a hot knife through butter. Yet the human warship was holding its own through sheer, unadulterated resilience. It didn't try to outmaneuver the harvester's attacks, it absorbed them. Its armor, though taking catastrophic damage, was ablative, designed to be sacrificed. Whole sections were blown away, exposing the skeletal superstructure beneath, yet the ship continued to fight, its engines burning with unwavering intensity. It was like watching a heavyweight boxer wade through a hail of punches to get close enough to deliver a knockout blow. The indomitable will's tactics were brutally simple. It closed the distance, ignoring the green beams that carved canyons into its hull. It got in close, point-blank range, and then it unleashed its main armament, a massive spinal-mounted cannon that fired a projectile with the mass of a small asteroid. The first shot struck the harvester's central mass, not with a clean penetration, but with a world-shattering impact that sent visible shockwaves through the alien vessel's structure. Chunks of its dark armor were blasted away, revealing glimpses of a complex, biomechanical interior that pulsed with a sickly green light. The harvester reeled, its attack patterns faltering for a crucial moment. It was clear it had not anticipated an enemy that would, or could, engage in such a vicious, close-quarters brawl. "This is insanity," Kalen murmured, more to himself than anyone. "They are trading hull integrity for positional advantage. The energy expenditure alone." Vulcan moved to stand beside him, his chitinous plates still locked in a rigid posture of shock. The universal transliterator struggled for a moment before rendering his words. "It is effective. My people's ship was destroyed in a single blow. This human vessel has taken dozens and continues to retaliate." Their definition of durability is unfamiliar. There was a new tone in Vulcan's translated voice, one Kalen had never heard before, a grudging, bewildered respect. The Cathar philosophy of war was one of precise, overwhelming force, a swift and honorable strike. What they were witnessing was a brawl, a messy, brutal, and terrifyingly persistent struggle for survival. On the main viewer, the battle reached a new crescendo. The harvester, seemingly angered or perhaps just recalculating, focused its entire forward battery on the indomitable will. A concentrated volley of green beams and a new, smaller null pulse struck the human ship's forward section. The result was catastrophic. The entire front quarter of the indomitable will vaporized in a silent flash. For a heart-stopping moment, Kalen believed it was over, that the human intervention had been a brief, futile gesture. But the ship fought on. Its main thrusters, located amidships and towards the stern, flared with incandescent fury, pushing the mangled wreck forward. The spinal cannon, miraculously intact, fired again, and again. Each shot was a hammer blow against the harvester's now exposed core. Then a new transmission came through, this one from the indomitable will to the harvester, broadcast on every frequency, a raw, open challenge. The voice was different now, not the calm officer from before, but a ragged, furious roar. "You want our world? You want our lives? Come and take them. We will break our ships on your hull. We will drown you in our blood. We will never stand." Down, the message was punctuated by another thunderous impact from the spinal cannon. The harvester's central core flickered, its internal green light flaring violently and then beginning to fade. It attempted to turn, to retreat, to create another spatial distortion. It was too late. The indomitable will, a gutted, burning husk, performed its last act. It triggered its self-destruct mechanism, overloading its gravity drive and secondary reactors in a chain reaction that created a miniature star for a fraction of a second at point-blank range. The harvester was consumed, its structure unable to withstand the raw, uncontained fusion blast from within. The flash faded, leaving only drifting debris and the expanding cloud of ionized gas that was all that remained of two mighty vessels. The silence on the bridge of the stalwart observer was absolute. The crew stared at the empty space where the battle had been, their faces pale, their minds unable to fully comprehend the sacrifice they had just witnessed. A ship and its entire crew had just annihilated themselves to save a science vessel they had never met. There was no logic to it, no strategic calculation that could justify such a loss. It was an act of pure, unyielding defiance. It was Vorkon who broke the silence. He turned to Kalen, his obsidian eyes wide. "Xenologist, your people, they do not simply fight to win." He paused, the transliterator clicking softly as it searched for the right concept. "They fight to endure. Even at the cost of their own existence, they ensure the enemy's end. This is a form of strength my people have no record of. It is formidable." In that moment, the entire dynamic of their relationship shifted. The Cathar, who measured worth in martial prowess and honor, had just seen a demonstration of a different kind of power. It was not the power of the sharpest blade, but the power of the anvil that shatters the hammer through sheer, unbreakable stubbornness. The rescue ship, a simple military tug, arrived hours later, its crew somber and efficient as they attached grapples to the crippled stalwart observer. As they were slowly towed towards the nearest human colony, Kalen looked back at the star field, now a graveyard. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that everything had just changed. Humanity was not just another species in the galactic community. They were the ones who had looked into the face of absolute annihilation and had not simply fought back. They had bitten off the hand that sought to crush them, even as they were being swallowed. The human colony on the frontier world of Ethelstan was not a place of soft edges and gentle welcomes. It was a fortress, carved into the iron-rich mountains of a world with a rusty red sky and a relentless, dusty wind. The architecture was blocky, reinforced, and utilitarian. Landing pads were shielded by massive, retractable blast doors, and the settlement itself was a labyrinth of tunnels and bunkers deep beneath the planet's surface. The air in the command center was cool and recycled, smelling of metal, ozone, and sweat. Kalen and Vorkon stood on an observation platform, looking down into the bustling pit of military activity. They had been debriefed for days by a succession of grim-faced officers from the Terran Strategic Defense Command. The story of the Harvester and the sacrifice of the indomitable will was not, to the humans' grim acknowledgement, a unique one. It was a chapter in a long, silent war that humanity had been fighting for generations, a war they had kept hidden from the rest of the galaxy. The commander of the Ethelstan garrison was a man named Valerius, his face a roadmap of old scars, his frame thick with the muscle of a life spent in high-gravity environments. He moved with a predator's grace, and his eyes held the same flat, determined calm as the voice from the indomitable will's first transmission. "The Harvesters," Valerius began, his voice a low rumble, "are not a nation. They are not an empire, they are a phenomenon, a galactic-scale cleansing mechanism. Their origin is unknown, their motivation is simple. They identify technologically advanced species and systematically eradicate them. They do not communicate, they do not negotiate, they do not take prisoners, they only harvest." He gestured to a star chart that dominated the far wall. It was not a map of political boundaries or trade routes, but a timeline of extinction. Dozens of star systems were marked with a black, pulsing icon. These are the worlds they have cleansed in this galactic arm alone over the last 500 years. We have found the ruins, the artifacts. Entire civilizations, some far more advanced than our own, reduced to dust and silence. He pointed to a cluster of systems near the human border, marked in defiant red. This is the front line. They found us about a century ago. We call it the first incursion. We lost 3 colony worlds before we even understood what was happening. Kalen felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. And you have fought them alone, all this time. Why keep this a secret? Valerius gave a humorless smile, a mere tightening of the lips. What would have been the point, xenologist? To spread panic? To have the Cathar or the Ilium Consortium or any of the other major powers see us as a contagion, a threat that draws this scourge? They would have quarantined us, or worse, tried to eliminate us preemptively to save themselves. We learned early on that no one else was willing to fight this war. They either failed, like all the others on that chart, or they lacked the necessary resolve. Vulcan clicked his mandibles, a sign of deep contemplation. The resolve of the indomitable will. You build your ships not to win battles, but to win the war, even in death. Exactly, Valerius said, his gaze intense. We cannot match their technology. We have tried for 100 years to reverse engineer their weapons, their drives. We have made progress, but it is slow. What we can do is outlast them. We can be harder to kill. We can make the cost of harvesting us so astronomically high that it becomes an inefficient use of their resources. Our ships are designed with multiple redundant systems, compartmentalized hulls, and a core philosophy. If you are going to die, you make sure you take the enemy with you. Every ship is a potential bomb. Every soldier is a walking booby trap. We fight with everything we have, including our own wreckage. He led them to a training simulation, a vast holographic arena where human soldiers in powered armor were practicing combat drills. The scenarios were not urban pacification or jungle warfare. They were set in the ruins of human cities, against harvester ground units, tall, multi-limbed machines that scuttled with a horrifying speed, their weapons firing the same corrosive green energy. The human tactics were, again, brutally pragmatic. They used the rubble for cover, yes, but they also used it as a weapon, triggering pre-placed demolitions to bury the machines. They fought in tight, coordinated units, but when a soldier was cornered, they did not surrender. The simulation showed a soldier, his armor breached, luring a harvester unit close before detonating the fusion core of his own power pack. The resulting blast vaporized the machine. Your people, they have no concept of the individual? Vulcan asked, the question sounding almost accusatory. Valerius looked at the Cathar, his expression unreadable. We have every concept of the individual. We cherish our lives, our families, our culture. That is precisely why we fight this way. The individual's life is precious, but the survival of the species is paramount. We are not drones. We are not a hive mind. Every single one of those soldiers chose to be here. They have names, they have loves, they have dreams. And they have made the conscious decision that their dreams are less important than the dream of a future for humanity. That is the foundation of our strategy. It is a strategy built not on technology, but on will, the unflinching human will. Kalen thought of the artistic and philosophical achievements of humanity, the music, the literature, the deep-seated drive for exploration and understanding. He had always seen that as the core of their identity. Now he saw the dark, steel spine that supported it all. This was not a separate facet of humanity. It was the same drive turned inward, forged in the crucible of an existential threat. The desire to create was matched, pound for pound, by the ferocious will to preserve that which had been created. He looked at Vulcan and saw the Cathar reassessing his entire worldview. Honor was a system for regulating conflict between peers. What humanity was engaged in was not a conflict. It was a fight for the very right to exist. And in such a fight, there were no rules, only survivors. The journey back to Cathar space, aboard a Terran diplomatic frigate, the Steadfast Resolve, was a profoundly different experience from the outward trip on the stalwart observer. The human ship was a testament to their hidden war. The corridors were wider to allow for the rapid movement of armored troops. Bulkheads were twice as thick as standard, and every intersection was a potential defensive choke point. The crew moved with a quiet, focused efficiency, their eyes constantly scanning, assessing. They were polite, even respectful to their Cathar guests, but there was a constant, low-level tension, a readiness that was as much a part of the ship's environment as the hum of the engines. Kalen spent much of the time in his quarters compiling his report. The words felt inadequate. How could he convey the sheer, terrifying scale of the Harvester threat? How could he explain the human strategy of calculated, sacrificial defiance in a way that the Cathar High Command would understand? They were a people who valued strength, but their definition was about projecting power, about victorious campaigns and expanded territory. The human strength was defensive, absorptive, a depth of resilience that was almost geological in its patience and scale. Vorkon, meanwhile, was undergoing his own internal revolution. He had requested and been granted access to the ship's historical archives pertaining to the Harvester War. He studied the records of the lost colonies, Avalon, Sanctuary, Promise, worlds that were now just names on a memorial wall. He watched declassified combat footage from 100 battles, each one a story of horrific loss and Pyrrhic victory. He saw human fleets, outgunned and outmaneuvered, turning their own dying ships into projectiles. He saw ground forces on poisoned worlds, fighting for every inch of irradiated soil, their last acts often being to deny the harvesters any usable biomass by triggering tactical nuclear devices. He saw the raw data on human industrial output, a wartime economy that had been running for a century, building fortress worlds and ships designed for a single, devastating engagement. He sought out Kalen one evening, the light of the swirling blue hyperspace tunnel casting shifting patterns on his chitinous plates. Xenologist Kalen, I have been analyzing the human strategic doctrine. It is illogical from a Cathar perspective. We believe a war is won by destroying the enemy's capacity to fight. The humans, they are not trying to destroy the harvester's capacity. They are trying to exhaust their will. They are betting that the harvesters, for all their power, have a limit to their resources, or at least their patience. They are turning themselves into a psychological weapon. Kalen nodded slowly, pouring 2 glasses of water. It is more than that, I think. They are redefining the terms of the conflict. The harvesters see this as a harvest, a simple process of collection and eradication. The humans have introduced a new variable, pain, not just the pain of loss, but the active, retaliatory pain of a cornered animal that fights back with every fiber of its being, with its teeth, its claws, its last dying breath. They are making the harvest not just difficult, but morally and existentially costly. The honor of the indomitable will, Vorkon said, the words sounding strange in his translated voice. It was not the honor of a clean victory. It was the honor of choosing the manner of one's death, and in doing so, saving others. It is a darker honor, a more profound one. He was silent for a long moment. My people must be made to understand. If the harvesters are real, and if they succeed in harvesting humanity, our turn will come. Our fleets, for all their power, are built for the wrong kind of war. We would be cut down as easily as the glorious Talon was. Our only hope is to learn from humanity. When they finally arrived at the Cathar homeworld, a planet of stark, magnificent deserts and soaring crystalline cities, the reception was frigid. The High Command, a council of the most venerable and formidable warriors, received them in a chamber that was a monument to Cathar martial history. Trophies from 1,000 conquered worlds adorned the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone and sacred oils. The lead commander, an ancient Cathar named Krax, listened to Kalen's report with a stony silence, his immense, scarred carapace immobile. When Kalen finished, detailing the harvester threat and the human strategy, Krax spoke, his voice a low, dismissive rumble. You speak of a hidden war, xenologist. You speak of a foe that can erase starships from existence. And you speak of a human strategy that consists of throwing their own lives away. This sounds like the desperate fantasy of a dying species, attempting to fabricate a grand narrative to explain their own technological and military inferiority. The destruction of the glorious Talon was a tragedy, but it was likely the result of a human weapon malfunction or a treacherous act. We have seen no evidence of this harvester beyond human testimony. Vorkon stepped forward, breaking protocol. His own stature was smaller than Krax's, but his posture was rigid with a new kind of conviction. High Commander, I was there. I saw the glorious Talon unmade by a weapon that defies our understanding of physics. I saw the human ship, the indomitable will, sacrifice itself to destroy that enemy. I have walked their fortress worlds. I have studied their records. The evidence is overwhelming. To deny it is not caution, it is blindness. Krax's eyes narrowed, a dangerous sign. You have been among them too long, Vorkon. You speak like a human. You talk of sacrifice and will as if they were weapons. They are the excuses of the weak. True strength lies in power, in discipline, in the unwavering certainty of victory. The indomitable will was certain of its victory, Vorkon countered, his voice rising. Its victory was not its own survival, but our survival and the destruction of the enemy. That is a certainty that transcends individual life. It is a strength the harvesters cannot comprehend and, I believe, cannot overcome. We must ally with humanity. We must learn from them. We must fortify our own worlds, redesign our ships. Our current path leads to extinction. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of clicks and guttural shouts. The old guard saw Vorkon's words as heresy, a betrayal of everything the Cathar stood for. The concept of building a ship with the primary design goal of a successful suicide mission was anathema to their warrior ethos. The debate raged for hours, but the tide was against them. The High Command, entrenched in their ways and suspicious of the humans' secretive nature, refused to officially acknowledge the harvester threat. They declared the incident with the glorious Talon an unexplained anomaly and severed the joint survey agreement with humanity. They were effectively putting their head in the sand, hoping the storm would pass them by. As they left the chamber, their mission a failure, Kalen felt a profound sense of despair. He had seen the abyss, and he had come to warn his people only to be dismissed as an alarmist. Vorkon, however, seemed strangely calm. He turned to Kalen, his obsidian eyes gleaming in the dim light of the corridor. They are wrong, but they are not all of my people. There are younger commanders, tacticians who see the truth. The High Command has chosen the path of willful ignorance. We must now choose another path. We must take this warning to those who will listen. The alliance may not be formal, but it will be forged in the fires to come. The humans have a saying, xenologist Kalen, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Our hope has failed. Now we must prepare. The silence from the Cathar High Command was a heavier blow to the Terran Strategic Defense Command than any military defeat could have been. It was a confirmation of their deepest, most cynical fears about the galactic community. In the war room on Ethelstan, Valerius received the news with a grim nod. So be it. We knew we could not rely on anyone but ourselves. It changes nothing. But Kalen, who had returned with Vorkon and a small contingent of Cathar dissidents, younger warriors and engineers who had heeded Vorkon's call, could see the faint shadow of disappointment in the commander's eyes. The hope for a shared burden, however small, had been there. What followed was a period of frantic, desperate preparation. The intelligence from the Battle of the Stalwart Observer and the ongoing analysis of harvester behavior patterns pointed to a grim conclusion. A major offensive was imminent. The harvesters did not simply give up. They learned, they adapted, and they returned in greater force. The humans called it the Anvil Strategy. Their fortress worlds like Ethelstan were the anvils. Their fleets, what remained of them, were the hammers. The plan was to let the harvesters commit to an assault on a fortified position and then hit them with everything they had, accepting catastrophic losses to blunt the enemy's advance. Kalen and Vorkan were integrated into the planning process. Vorkan's knowledge of Cathar military doctrine, now turned against the hypothetical strategies of the harvesters, proved invaluable. He pointed out weaknesses in the human defensive layouts that were born of a different tactical mindset, suggesting adjustments that made the fortifications even more formidable. His engineers worked alongside human counterparts, their innate understanding of plasma dynamics and energy shielding helping to improve the defensive grid. It was an unofficial, ad hoc alliance, a tiny spark of cooperation in the overwhelming darkness. Then, the sensors lit up. Not one, not two, but 3 harvester supercarriers, each larger than the one that had destroyed the glorious Talon, emerged from distorted space at the edge of the Ethelstan system. They were accompanied by a swarm of smaller, fighter-like vessels and dozens of cruiser-class ships. It was an armada of extinction. The system-wide alert was a single, sustained tone that echoed through every corridor, every bunker, every soul on the planet. This was not a raid. This was the main event. From the command bunker deep beneath Ethelstan's mountains, Valerius oversaw the defense. His voice was calm, a steady rock in the rising tide of panic. All civilian populations are to shelter in place. Orbital defense platforms activate primary batteries. Fleet groups Alpha and Beta assume interdiction positions. Remember the plan. We are the anvil. Let them break upon us. On the main tactical display, the human fleet, a collection of battered, rugged ships, moved into formation. They were outnumbered and outgunned, a flotilla of Davids against a trio of Goliaths. The battle began with a silent, long-range exchange. The harvester carriers launched waves of their fighter scouts, which engaged the human picket ships in a dizzying, chaotic dance of light and death. The green beams of the harvesters clashed with the solid-shot projectiles and laser batteries of the human defenders. Ships on both sides died, flashing into brief, silent suns before winking out. The human lines held, but they were being pushed back, slowly, inexorably, towards the planet. Then the harvester cruisers moved in, focusing their null weapons on the orbital defense platforms. One by one, the massive stations, each a small city in its own right, were erased from existence. There was no debris, only a terrifying emptiness where they had been. "Anvil is taking heavy strikes," a tactical officer reported, his voice tight. "Shields on the northern hemisphere grid are failing." Valerius didn't flinch. "Activate the planetary defense cannons. Target the lead carrier's weapon arrays. Fleet Group Gamma, the Steadfast Resolve and her squadron, you are cleared for Hammer Protocol. Godspeed." The Steadfast Resolve, the ship that had brought Kalen and Vorkan to Ethelstan, was not a frontline warship. But in the Terran Defense Command, every ship was a weapon. Along with a dozen other frigates and destroyers, it powered its engines to maximum, on a direct, suicide course for the lead harvester carrier. They were not trying to dogfight. They were not trying to outmaneuver. They were flying straight down the enemy's throat, a final, desperate spear thrust. The harvesters, recognizing the tactic, focused their entire point defense network on the incoming squadron. Ships were torn apart, vaporized by concentrated fire. The Steadfast Resolve took multiple direct hits, its shields failing, its armor peeling away like the skin of an onion. On the bridge of the dying frigate, the captain, a woman Kalen had shared meals with, broadcast one final open-channel message. "For Earth, for Ethelstan, for every soul we've lost, see you in hell, you bastards." The Steadfast Resolve, along with the few remaining ships of its squadron, slammed into the harvester carrier at a significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic impact alone was devastating, but a millisecond later, their pre-armed warheads detonated. A chain reaction of fusion fire tore through the carrier's hull. It did not disintegrate silently like the victims of the null weapon. It exploded, a roiling, fiery blossom of death that lit up the dark side of Ethelstan for a brief, terrifying moment. One of the 3 Goliaths had fallen. The loss of the carrier sent a shockwave through the Harvester formation. Their attacks became less coordinated, more frantic. It was the opening the human defenders needed. The remaining orbital platforms and the planetary defense cannons redoubled their fire, concentrating on the second carrier. The human fleet, what was left of it, regrouped and pressed the attack with a renewed, furious intensity. They had seen the sacrifice, and it had not demoralized them, it had enraged them. They fought with the cold, focused fury of those who have nothing left to lose. The battle was far from over, the outcome still hung in the balance, but a message had been sent, as clear as the light from the dying carrier. Humanity would not fall quietly. They would drag their executioners into the grave with them, and make the universe itself bear witness to their passing. The second Harvester carrier, reeling from the loss of its sister ship, and the relentless, almost feral counter-assault from the human forces, began to withdraw. It was a slow, fighting retreat, pouring fire into the human formations to cover its movement back towards the safety of distorted space. The third carrier, however, seemed to undergo a fundamental shift in strategy. It ceased its bombardment of the planet and turned its full attention to the remaining human fleet. It was no longer attempting a harvest, it was attempting a purge. Its weapons fired with a new, frantic rhythm, and it launched its entire reserve of fighter scouts in a single, overwhelming wave. The human fleet, already battered and bleeding, was being systematically dismantled. On the surface, in the command bunker, the mood was grim. The cost had been astronomical. The orbital defense grid was in ruins. Over 80% of the fleet was gone. The steadfast resolve and its brave crew were atoms, but the planet and the millions of souls on it still stood. Valerius, his face etched with a fresh layer of exhaustion, watched the tactical display. They are learning, they are adapting to our tactics. The next time they come, the hammer protocol may not work. He turned to Kalen and Vorkan. You have both seen the price. Is it a price your people are willing to pay? Before they could answer, a new alert chimed. A senior sensor operator looked up, his face a mask of confusion. Commander, we have new contacts emerging from hyperspace. Bearing 090, Mark 314. It's a Cathar battle fleet. On the display, a new swarm of icons appeared, sleek, predatory, and glorious in their martial symmetry. Dozens of Cathar warships, led by a massive dreadnought, dropped out of warp. They moved into the system with the precise, elegant formations Kalen remembered from the glorious Talon. For a moment, he feared they had come to finish the job the Harvesters had started, to claim the weakened system for their own. But then, a transmission came through, Vorkan's personal cipher. The face that appeared on the screen was not that of the ancient High Commander Krax, but of a younger, fiercer Cathar, his carapace adorned with the markings of a frontier fleet master. I am Fleet Master Zar of the Cathar Vanguard. We have heard the call from Vorkan and the human Kalen. The High Command chooses to hide. We choose to fight. His translated voice was sharp, decisive. The enemy of our potential ally is our enemy. We will engage the remaining carrier. Prepare to coordinate fire. It was not an official declaration from the Cathar government. It was a rebellion, a mutiny of conscience. These were the commanders and crews who had listened, who had seen the data, and who had decided that honor did not lie in blind obedience to a cowardly leadership, but in standing with those who fought for the right of all species to exist. Their arrival changed everything. The Cathar fleet did not fight like the humans. They did not charge in for suicidal close-range engagements. They fought with their traditional strengths, disciplined long-range volleys of plasma fire, intricate flanking maneuvers, and devastating coordinated strikes. Their ships were faster, more agile than the human vessels, and their shields were tuned to resist energy-based attacks far more effectively. They harried the remaining Harvester carrier, drawing its fire, forcing it to split its attention. Their plasma cannons, while not as brutally kinetic as the human weapons, scored deep, burning wounds across the carrier's hull, overloading its defensive systems. The human fleet, seeing the unexpected reinforcements, found a second wind. The remaining ships, a ragged collection of cruisers and frigates, regrouped around the Cathar formation. It was an unorthodox patchwork alliance, the brute force resilience of humanity combined with the surgical precision of the Cathar vanguard. They spoke different tactical languages, but they shared a common goal. Valerius and Fleet Master Zar communicated in terse, efficient bursts, their commands translated in real time, weaving their disparate forces into a single, cohesive weapon. The final act of the Battle of Ethelstan was a masterpiece of improvised cooperation. The Cathar fleet launched a concentrated barrage on the carrier's primary null weapon array, overloading its containment field. As the alien weapons sputtered and died, the human ships, those that still could, performed their signature move. They went to full burn, ignoring the smaller harvester vessels, and slammed into the carrier's now exposed underbelly. There was no self-destruct this time. It was a physical, brutal ramming combined with point-blank broadsides. The Cathar provided covering fire, eliminating the carrier's point defense systems as the humans made their final, fatal run. The harvester carrier did not explode. It came apart, its structural integrity failing under the combined kinetic and plasma assault. It broke into 3 large pieces, each tumbling end over end, venting atmosphere and that sickly green internal light into the void. The remaining harvester fighters, bereft of their command and control, ceased their attacks and self-destructed in a series of small, synchronized flashes. As quickly as it had begun, the battle was over. The silence that followed was the silence of a storm that has passed, leaving only wreckage and awe in its wake. In the command bunker, the cheering was slow to start, then built into a thunderous roar. Soldiers, technicians, and officers embraced, humans and the few Cathar who had come with Vorkan, their differences meaningless in the face of their shared victory. Valerius slumped into his chair, the weight of 100 years of war seeming to lift from his shoulders, if only for a moment. He looked at Kalen and Vorkan. "You brought them," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he had long suppressed. "You actually brought them." On the view screen, Fleet Master Zar appeared again. "The threat is neutralized. We have sustained losses, but the battle is won." He paused, his obsidian eyes taking in the scene in the human bunker. "The High Command will disavow our actions. They will call us traitors, but we have seen the truth today. We have seen that the human will is not a myth, and we have seen that our strength, when combined with that will, can shatter even this enemy." He placed a clawed fist over his central thoracic plate, a Cathar gesture of ultimate respect. The Vanguard fleet pledges itself to this cause. The formal alliance may not exist on paper, but it exists here in this moment. It exists in blood and fire. Kalen looked out through the bunker's external sensors at the battlefield. The space around Ethelstan was a graveyard, filled with the husks of human and Cathar ships and the colossal ruins of the Harvester Armada. It was a scene of immense destruction, a testament to loss. But it was also something else. It was a signal fire lit in the darkest night. It was proof that the unflinching sky was not the sole domain of the Reapers. It could also be claimed by those who refused to be harvested, by those who chose to stand together, anvil and hammer, human and alien, and defy the inevitable. The war was not over, he knew. It was only beginning. But for the first time since he had looked into the abyss from the bridge of the stalwart observer, Kalen felt not fear, but a fragile, defiant thing called hope.